Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, we're good. Welcome to the podcast, or the webinar, I should say, for Public Relations 101 and 301. Our panelists are here. We've got our participants joining. We're going to give people a couple minutes to join. Those of you who are already on, you've done this before. The general rule is, if you have a question, raise your hand. I mean that figuratively. There's a button on your Zoom window to do so. And we'll take the questions towards the end. I have a bunch of questions though, so we may get to it before you get to ask it. So don't worry, don't be shy. Raise your hands as you have questions, and you can lower your hand if it's already answered. Okay, we're at 10 participants, so we'll give people a couple more seconds to come in. By the way, this is not a backdrop behind me. This is actually the New York office. Pretty nice. While we're waiting for people to come in, why don't I ask real quick, Melody, where are you zooming in from?
I am from the Lower East Side here in Manhattan.
Oh, so you're basically not very far from us.
No.
We could have had you come in. Okay, no worries. AJ, I know you're coming in from Austin.
Yep, good morning from Austin. I do not have as pretty of a backdrop. Austin skyline doesn't provide in this office, unfortunately, so don't get the buildings.
No. And Nur-e, where is that bookcase situated?
It's in Silicon Valley. I'm in San Mateo, California.
Oh, I've heard of it. Okay, let's give people just another minute or two to cycle in, and then we will get started. Doug, did you send out an all channel reminder? I'm just curious if
Absolutely. And then again, this is one that goes to the recording and then up to the channel, so they may be taking advantage of it on the back end.
Okay, no worries. Then why don't we get started? So first of all, for those of you who don't already know, I don't know how that's possible. I'm Andrew Ackerman. I'm the managing director in New York, primarily responsible for the EdTech track, and I'm moderating this panel on PR. I'm doing it because I know just enough to ask intelligence questions and not enough to actually answer them. We have 3 panelists today. They bring a wide range of experiences to the table. I'm going to leverage alphabetical order to play blatant favorites with the Dreamit alumni. I'm going to introduce AJ Bruno first, co-founder and CEO of TrendKite.
Good morning, guys.
Just a minute or two.
Yeah, good morning, guys. As Andrew said, we are a Dreamit alum here in Austin, Texas. We're a Series C $20 million funded startup, just over 120 employees that are headquartered here, and we focus primarily on PR and PR analytics. Our goal is to help organizations, companies, startups alike really understand the value of what they're getting for their earned media. We also look at things like press releases, part of the paid space, and as well as own, so blogs, and understanding what that actually brings to them. We work with a variety of different organizations, everywhere from BP to Boeing to JetBlue, Hershey's, Nike, Adidas, to a lot of different agencies, as well as a lot of different startups. We work with all of our portfolio companies that are part of the Silverton and Mercury Fund here in Austin as well. So have about 10 years of experience in the media monitoring, media measurement space, and working with clients in a face-to-face or over-the-phone environment, and have heard a variety of different pain points over the years.
Cool, thank you, AJ. Next up, both alphabetically and in order of nepotism, is Nur-e Farzana Rahman. It's a little bit more subtle there, but Nur-e and I overlapped but did not work together, who's one of the best consulting companies on the earth. But that's not important right now. Nur-e, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nur-e Rahman, and I am a consultant for various startups in the strategic communications and PR space. As Andrew mentioned, we worked together, not together, but we worked at Booz Allen. So I've worked at larger companies such as Booz Allen doing strategic communications, change management, and crisis communications. And since then, moved on to SunGuard Availability Services and moved out to Silicon Valley about 8 months ago now and caught the startup bug. So I've been working in the fintech and health tech space since then for a number of startups, including ones that haven't been as successful as they would have hoped, which really actually provided a ton of insight for me as a communications consultant, because I got to do something that not a lot of people I would hope that not a lot of people in my career track would want to do, which is to fire their customers for a customer. So it's been an interesting adventure-filled ride since I've arrived. So I'm happy to be here this morning and answer any questions that I can.
Okay, thank you. So now, Melody, I managed not to get your name wrong.
Great.
Welcome aboard, Melody. I don't actually recall if I ever read any of your pieces when you were writing for Time Out, but one of the interesting things that Melody brings to the table that I don't think we've ever had on a panel before, she's actually both written and been an editor-in-chief for various publications. But rather than steal your thunder, why don't you tell them about it?
Sure. So my name is Melody Serafino, and thank you to the Dreamit team for inviting me to be a part of this discussion today. I'm really excited to talk to everybody. I run a communications firm called Number 29 Communications. We're a boutique media relations firm based in New York. And we work with clients who are trying to make the world a little bit better than they found it. So I think we all get to a point in our career where we want to have positive impact. And so 2.5 years ago, my business partner and I decided that we were going to take more ownership of the types of people we were working with. And our clients tend to fit into 3 different categories. So that's social impact, sustainability, and arts, culture, and design. And they could be clients who are in the startup and technology world, Fortune 500 companies, or nonprofits. And I've worked in communications for 11 years, both as a PR person, but also, as Andrew mentioned, as a writer. So I have done some freelance writing for Time Out New York for the last 6 years. And I'm also teaching a course at NYU this summer on communications and PR writing that is meant for professionals. So if anyone's looking to hone that particular skill, it's a non-credit course. I encourage you to sign up for it.
Excellent, great. Let's jump right in because we have a lot of questions, and I have a lot of questions I'd like to get answered too. So let's start very high level. And Melody, why don't you kick it off? The number one question here is, why are you doing PR? What are the different goals that a company might have as they do PR, and how does that affect their strategy for getting coverage?
Sure. So a lot of the clients we work with we're starting with them right at the beginning of when they're starting to talk about themselves. It may be very early. They might be just starting to launch. We may engage with them 3 or 4 months out before anybody even knows that they exist. So they may have done some beta testing, but they've not officially launched. And I always like to tell my clients, you've not launched in the media until you have that first press story. But we help them identify the right moment to tell that story and how to tell that story. And I think the really important thing is when you're looking to talk about a company, not just talking about all the great things that you're doing and how amazing it is, who you are and what your company does, but really understanding what is the challenge that you're trying to solve? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Why do people want to hear about what you're doing now? Why are you relevant? What is the urgency to writing about you? And that's really what we help our clients identify. So we work with them on messaging, strategic communications, putting together a plan that will help them continue the momentum past that launch period, because we often see a flurry of press coverage when a company first launches, people talking about the VC funding they've gotten, sort of the platform that they're introducing. But then how do you sustain that over time when you don't have those big moments every month? What can you be talking about? How can you be seen as a thought leader in your space? How can you start to own the conversation of your industry? And so those are all things that we look to help our clients identify.
So I'm definitely going to get back to the question about how you can keep the story fresh. Implicit in your answer, it seems like most of your clients are interested in getting users, right? They're doing a launch coverage that's usually for users. Do any of your clients have different goals?
So I think it's awareness and traction. And I think the thing about PR that we always like to tell people is we can't guarantee that because we get you a story in the New York Times, you're going to suddenly have a robust user base. You have to have a product that works. You have to have something that's solving something. So I think for a lot of our clients, it's also about creating conversation around really important causes and topics. We work a lot in the social issues space. And so we might be working with an artist who has a really great exhibition, but that's just a part of the story. It's not necessarily about getting people to go see that exhibition and maybe talking about tension that's happening in the Middle East that is reflected through the art that they're working on. So maybe about creating really interesting conversation that may not be already being discussed in the media.
Cool. I want to keep coming back to this theme as we talk about the different tactics that companies can use. I want to see that through the lens of the different goals they might have. Now, I'm not going to make a point of asking each question to each panelist, but some of them I'm going to open up Nur-e, AJ, do you have anything that you want to add to that in terms of different goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us and thinking about TrendKite when we were starting, but also for what our company does, it's really important when you talk about measurement and you talk about traction, something that marketing has always traditionally been able to do, either through marketing automation platforms like HubSpot or Marketo. You understand the value of Google AdWords, you understand all of these different channels. There's a lot of different user acquisition strategies. PR has always been this, well, kind of understanding, talking what Melody said, awareness of what it is. And for us as entrepreneurs, we're like, I want that TechCrunch piece because it gives a lot of credence and credibility to who I am. I can show my family and friends. But what we actually, when you really get down to it and you look into the Google Analytics from it, there's a lot of referral traffic that you will actually bring our user acquisition. 2 of our first 3 customers came from a PR piece that Dreamit actually placed or helped us place. And that was a really huge win. So taking that in the early days and then being able to build upon it and having a framework and what we're measuring, and looking at the goals, it always starts with the goals of what you want to achieve. That's the really important piece to PR.
Awesome. So far I have 2 goals. One is just straight out now customer acquisition, and the other one, as you mentioned, is establishing that kind of credibility that you get from a high-level masthead that's covered you, and then you ultimately leverage that into, especially in the B2B space, the ability to land a good referenceable customer. Nur-e, any other goals that you've worked on, other than those in the course of your career?
Thanks, Andrew. So what I was going to add to that is, depending on what stage of startup you're working on, sometimes the goal mainly is to, so with public relations, you define your stakeholders, and sometimes as you're helping to tell a story, the stakeholder is defined as a VC. So if you're trying to get Series B funding, or if you're trying to even get Series A funding, oftentimes, I've had 1 or 2 companies that have been, that we've launched and done PR around and really written a strong kind of launch story to tell so that they could present a better story to their investors as they're going in for their next round of funding. So that's another stakeholder to consider, not just, in terms of users, but Melody brought up a really good point earlier, which is that you want to make sure as you're doing that you do have an MVP, and that you do have something that you can really bring out to market before you do that, because sometimes it's very easy to take slideware and go out there and really sell it because you believe in the dream and you believe in what you want to say, and you can write a really compelling story around that sometimes, and maybe that's not the best choice, but funding's one of the things that I've seen a lot of companies launch around.
So great. We have 3 basic goals: users, credibility in general, which may lead to customers also, and ultimately to help influence potential VCs who might invest in you. But Nur-e, I got to thank you. That was the perfect transition to the next question, which is, before even starting any kind of PR initiative, what should the startups have ready in their back pocket to go? Why don't you keep going with that?
So absolutely. I'll start, and then I'd love to hear what Adrian and Melody have to add to this. So from my experience, what I feel are necessary, as I was mentioning, a minimally viable product, you want to make sure that you have something that you're willing to go out to market with. This is a foundation. So if you're a product-based company, you want to make sure that you have a product that works, not something that has a roadmap that will work, but something that you can actually deliver on to customers as it stands. Because as I was mentioning, it's very easy to kind of come up with a beautiful roadmap and have a dream of what you want to accomplish. And, a lot of startups, most startups have some sort of a vision in mind as they kick off. And so if you have that roadmap, then it's easy to convince yourself that you're going to catch up to the roadmap and it's okay to go ahead and jump the gun a little bit. I would advise against that unless your roadmap's like within a month of when you're pulling the trigger. So if you're going to start a PR effort and you're going to ultimately, when people ask what I do, I tell them that I'm a professional storyteller. And so I have the privilege of helping companies tell their stories. And so if you have a really compelling story, but nothing to actually back it, it's going to fall very flat on its face very quickly. So as you get prepared for PR, obviously the things that you want to have in your back pocket as well, aside from that, product and or service that you can really share with somebody, you want to have that strategic communications plan, as Melody was mentioning, because you don't want to just launch something and then have it fizzle out. You want to be able to tell a sustainable story where you launch, it's powerful, there's amazing things that you want to share with people. And then what happens a month after then, or 6 months after then? So whatever that communications plan looks like, you want to think about that before you go out there and try to get the TechCrunch article, or the even, a lot of startups will want to jump straight to the tier ones and will want New York Times press coverage or Wall Street Journal. And really, I mean, I ask my clients, what are they looking for and why are they trying to get that coverage? Like, what are they trying to accomplish? And then finding, I mean, if that's reasonable, then you go for it. And if it's not, trying to find alternate solutions for that.
Cool. So far, number one, an MVP or very, very close to it. Number two, the long-term plan. It's not just one article, but what else are you going to try to get placing? Melody, why don't we keep going with you? What other things from a technical perspective, even if it's nitty-gritty stuff like, having a press section on your website, what else do you want to have in your back pocket ready to go before you pull the trigger on anything?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more with everything that Nur-e said. I think obviously the main thing is to have whatever product or service in a good place. You don't want reporters to be the one finding bugs in what you're launching. I think from the PR side, also thinking about things like, who is your company spokesperson? Is it the CEO or founder, or is it somebody else on your team who might have a particular expertise and could speak to a more technical focused reporter? Also thinking it through an FAQ. With every one of my clients, I always work through an FAQ with them, which helps them hone their messaging, but also helps anticipate some of the potential negative questions they may get from reporters. So where are the places that their product might fall short? What are some of the controversial things that might be related to what they're launching? So they're really comfortable with that and it doesn't catch them off guard when they're in the middle of an interview. Of course, having something on your website that resembles a press section, even if it's simply putting your press release somewhere and saying, for press inquiries, contact this person. And also having downloadable high-res images if they're applicable to what you're launching, so that there's a very easy place for reporters to go and to be able to get those visuals for whatever stories they're writing. And then lastly, if social media is an important asset of what you're launching, making sure that you're building those channels in advance of launch, getting some robust content on there and having an editorial plan for that content so that on day one, you're not starting at 0 users, but you already have some content on there leading up to your launch, and that you can be using that as another place to be sort of talking about not just your product, but the industry that you're in, referencing other things that might be relevant to what you're launching, and really start to create a resource for people so they want to come and see what you have to say.
Excellent, excellent. AJ, unless there's something you're aching to add, I have a different question I want to follow on with you. So,
well, the only one caveat I'll add is the compelling story that Nur-e said was great, but you also want to pay attention to what's happening in the news cycles today and make sure that you're not trying to tell a story that's being told currently or in a different way. So it's just something to look out. You could do an easy Google News search before you're actually going to try to push that story. That's my only point.
Cool. So overall plan beyond just this one push for PR, an MVP, a press section with downloadables and other information about you, FAQ/talking points to make sure that you're comfortable with the questions you're going to get, and just understanding what else is going on in that whole story space so that you're not trying to, to sell something boring, basically, for lack of a better way to put it.
Correct.
Excellent. Great. So I wanted to talk, I want to pose this one to you, AJ. TrendKite is all about measuring the effects of PR. Are all venues created equal, like blogs versus magazines versus radio? Which ones are overall better? Or if that question doesn't have any meaning, which ones are better for different purposes?
Right, and it definitely goes back to what your goals are and when you're setting this. I heard a couple times things like tier 1 publications, but the truth of the matter is PR is an ever-changing space where social and traditional editorial content has changed so much over the years that it really, if you're thinking about, look, I actually want to drive traffic, well, the New York Times might drive a lot of traffic, but it might not actually give you what you want in terms of conversions or goals. So when you get someone to a landing page or someone to your site, what is it that you want them to do? Do you want them to raise their hand and say, look, I'd love to take a look at your service? Or do you want them to fill out some sort of membership? So it's really about that, because taking that goal and then working back to it. And the example I can give is that we've had a couple great earned pieces of coverage, both on fundraising, but then from interviews from our clients. We had one a couple months ago in TechCrunch for our most recent round. We had that piece, and then the very next week we had a great piece of coverage in PR Week from one of our clients, Mondelez Nabisco. And in thinking about that intuitively, you would think that the PR Week would drive the right traffic to our site and get the right type of customer, the people that are thinking about PR professionals. What actually ended up happening was that TechCrunch drove over 25 times more coverage or more traffic to our website, and through that created 25 times more conversions. And we could actually pinpoint through that top of the funnel activities, the conversations we were having, and following it through Salesforce actually took it all the way down to how many deals did we close on each piece of coverage. And it was just a really validating moment for us, because it completely blew up what we thought. So for lots of startups and companies out there, if you are like so gung-ho on TechCrunch, well, that's great, but as some of the others have mentioned, it really might not be what you need. A food blog out in California might be the golden ticket there. Tatcha is one of our clients, and through our GA connection in our platform, we're able to actually identify a food blogger that was helping drive more traffic than all of their other press coverage combined. And they had no idea. They had no idea this influencer even existed, because GA is there's so much out there, but we were looking at just the PR piece of it and help them identify that particular blogger so that they could set up a relationship.
Got it. So it's not just the raw views that your article is going to get, not even the raw number of clicks you're going to get from the article. I think all the way down to what you think your ultimate conversion is going to be. Though sometimes that surprises you.
And just to follow up on that point, actually, Andrew, AJ, I love what you said over there, because, oftentimes we look at marketing through a funnel. We don't always look at PR through a funnel, and there's significant value in doing that. Absolutely. Like who are you going to reach, and what is your reach going to look like, and what's that going to be if you go for a major publication? But there's such value to all of the different assets that we've discussed. So whether it's a channel partner or a blog that you're using, or a trade publications even, it's sometimes I've seen for some of my clients, it's a little bit more difficult to necessarily be able to track exactly if you're using a trade publication or something like that. But we've seen a lot of leads come in through things like that as well. So like kind of putting that conversion funnel and that buyer's journey like through to PR as well helps you to kind of track that story as not to twist AJ's words, but I love what he's saying about making sure that you kind of really pin that funnel to what you're doing in PR.
And Melody, let me ask you to build on that, right? So there's a whole bunch of different channels that a startup can go for. Approaching each channel intuitively, I would imagine it takes a different approach, a different amount of lead time, a different way to approach the actual person who's creating the content. Would you like to take us through, in your experience, how that varies, whether it's a daily newspaper versus a weekly or a monthly publication, or radio or television?
Sure. Yeah, I think it all harkens back to this idea of understanding both your audience and the audience of who the reporter you're trying to reach is writing for. I think, with the blogs, sometimes these smaller niche blogs actually have much more engaged audiences. So when you're reaching out to them, they might give you more space and more text to your story than something like the New York Times. So when I'm working with an outlet like the New York Times, let's just say you have something that is Times worthy, and let's be frank, most people don't have a Times worthy story, but everybody wants to be in the New York Times. So, and we work a lot with reporters at the Times, but thinking when you're working with them, you're working on a longer lead, because they have a fact-checking process. They're going to write a more thoughtful story. So if you go out to them the day before to say, my company's launching tomorrow, you're probably not going to get a lot of traction. they also want to be the first ones to tell a story. So often if we're working with, let's say, Wall Street Journal and New York Times, we'll go out to them a week or two in advance of what our embargo date is. And embargo date is just sort of a designated day and time that we've decided that this story can then be live to the world, and that's what we tell reporters. And we might offer them an exclusive. So we might say, listen, we want you to be the first to tell this story. We'll give you access to our CEO. We'll have you come by the office. We'll give you everything you need to know to tell this story before anybody else. And once they agree to that, once that story goes live, you can then pitch everybody else that you want to. And that's a really great tactic to use with something like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, because again, they want to be first to tell a story, and you want to feel like you're really targeting them. You're giving them a tailored pitch, and you're telling them exactly why you want them to be the first ones to tell it. With the trades, it's a little bit different. Trades don't typically need exclusives. You don't need to give them a ton of lead time. They tend to be shorter staffed, so they do appreciate things like press releases, because a lot of times they're literally copying and pasting that content. The other thing they love, because they are desperate for content and often short staffed, is if you have someone on your team who can write an op-ed for them. So to pitch them a story about not what you're doing, because an op-ed can't be a straight up advertisement for your business, but perhaps you can offer some tips or lessons for fellow entrepreneurs or somebody else in your industry. You can put together an 800-word byline for them, and they'll publish that. And that can really establish you as a thought leader in the space. That allows you to start to own a conversation that's beyond just, we launched this great product, but here's what's happening in the industry, and here's where we sit. This is what we're seeing. We have this proprietary information, and so here are some takeaways. So I think that's a really great way to work with trade publications.
And what kind of time frame would you expect with a trade publication?
So I think, it totally varies, because a lot of the work is being put back on you. You want to give yourself the time to do it. And I know that I end up penning a lot of my clients' op-eds with their names on it. So you want to give yourself plenty of lead time for that. I would say a few weeks out, you would go to them and say, hey, here's what we're thinking. I wouldn't ever write anything until they give you the green light to start to put something together. Otherwise, you've just wasted a lot of time. And then you share it with them. Typically, they'll have some edits, and that could go back and forth for 2 weeks. And then, you usually can't control their editorial schedule, but they're usually pretty willing to work with you in terms of what makes sense.
Got it. How about television? We haven't talked about TV. Does it matter anymore?
In terms of what? Does TV matter as a channel, as a medium?
Yeah, as a, no pun intended, as a channel. For the goals that we talked about earlier, I imagine it works for some, not for others. But how do you go about positioning yourself to get TV or I guess by extension radio coverage, if that's relevant?
Yeah, I think TV and radio still do matter, but you need to have very specific stories for them. For television, it has to be a visual story. Unless you're an expert who is sort of known in your industry and can go on and sort of be a talking head, you have to think about television. When you're watching a segment on a morning show, it's very visual. There's just something to be able to show, photos, something that really connects with the consumer base. Most companies, unless you have a very consumer focus, are not great for just mainstream TV. Maybe that's when you start to consider things like a CNBC or something that's a bit more business targeted. But you also have to think about, like, what are you bringing to the table? What is your expertise? What do you want people to take away from this? And is it a straight up pitch about your company? It might not be. Maybe it's you're launching a new app and you want the Today Show to do a coverage roundup of the 5 best new apps for wellness. And so you position it that way. So it's not strictly about your app, but you help pull together some of the other apps you think fit into this space. You pitch that as a package story. I think when you're working with producers, the more you can do the work for them, the legwork ahead of time, the better you'll be, because they're working on so many segments at once. You want to be able to say in that first outreach, who can you present to them as a spokesperson? Are there what visuals can you offer up? What access can you give them? And you want to package that really nicely and really succinctly so they don't really have to do any of the work.
So a common theme here appears to be, people are lazy or overworked or both.
I think the reality is newsrooms are shrinking, and so people don't have the time. They're working on 30 stories at once, so you need to make it really easy.
Totally respect that. Before I switch over to Nur-e or AJ here, what about for those few remaining monthly magazines? What's the process and timeline like, and what are they looking for?
So monthly magazines are typically on a 3-month lead time. So believe it or not, if you have a product that you want to pitch for a holiday gift guide, you should be pitching that in July or August, because they're closing their gift guides by September. So you have to really back up several months. Now, of course, every magazine has a digital site. So in some cases, maybe it's not that important for you to actually be in the print magazine, because most of their digital sites are getting more eyeballs than their monthly subscription base anyway. So you just need to think about what's important there.
Cool. Nur-e or AJ, first one to raise their hand gets to chime in. There you go, AJ, you're on.
Sure. So TV and broadcast, just really quickly, hasn't ever been a direct strategy for TrendKite, mainly because we're B2B, and that effort there isn't really for us in terms of a channel and as a strategy. But I will say we have a broadcasting monitoring part of our service, and about 40% of our clients utilize it. So it's certainly still something that people look at and want to measure, but it's definitely not a strategy for everyone. As far as monthly magazines, I think to Melody's point, it's 120% of content usually from a publication is actually put online, meaning they're putting more online. And of course, a lot of organizations or a lot of people, when they hear breaking news, they're going to obviously go straight online. Now, that's not to say that print's not valuable at all. In fact, for lots and lots of different organizations, it's extremely valuable. A high glossy is important. So
give us a for instance so we get a sense of when the print matters.
So convention and visitors bureaus, we work with quite a few of them, and we have a print integration into our platform that they'll get emailed clips from them. But for those type of tourism, it makes a big difference if you have a full page spread of some things and attractions that are going on, and versus reading it online where we have attention spans of 10 seconds or less. So it does make a difference if it's in a magazine versus digital sometimes.
Cool. So Nur-e, I have another question for you. Feel free to tag on anything you want to add to the prior question. I was going to ask you, when you're doing content marketing for your clients, how do you get reporters at these various different publications interested in, how do you make contact with them even? Because it's not always, they're very time-starved. It's not always easy to get them to answer an email or phone call or tweet or a smoke signal. So what are your tactics, really brass tacks, for the startups on the call for figuring out who to contact and how to actually get through to them?
Sure. I'll answer the last round of questions that we're having, and then tack onto it, and probably will ask AJ and Melody to kind of help with this, because I've been in very interesting situations with some of the customers that I've had. So I'll answer what I can about it, and then toss the ball over to the other panelists to see if they can add some additional insight. What I wanted to just finish off on the last topic of conversation is that something I think it was AJ who said it about B2B. So what's interesting is that a couple of my clients have been in the B2B2C space. And so you really want to make sure and segment your stakeholder populations properly. And this is just playing off of what Melody is saying. So when you do a stakeholder analysis and you kind of look at who is your audience, what are they reading, and so you do like a persona profile or whatever, however you do this, if you segment it and you say the average person that the average buyer is 46 years old, choose a gender, choose a job title, choose their 3 favorite ways to consume information. And once you start getting all of that data into one place, you kind of get this like segmented, like this vision of who they are, then you can sort of go out there and say, oh, is Bloomberg the right place? Do they pick up, are they into Forbes instead? When I worked at SunGard, for example, we had a paid relationship with Forbes through their Forbes brand voice site. Google doesn't treat Forbes, Google treats Forbes as a news site. And so even if you have a paid to play relationship with Forbes through brand voice, if you can afford it, you still will rank in Google searches. So SEO, it goes through the roof. Every article that you write or listicle that you write will rank. And so that's one way that, SunGard was really successful in helping that. Now for startups, it's kind of a hefty price tag, but you can create channel partnerships with companies like SunGard where you can kind of have access to that without paying, the $50K or whatever it is a month to do that. So I just wanted to kind of talk about, the fact that this B2B2C space was very different because, the average consumer might be watching Good Morning America or watching the news or watching, whatever it is, cable TV, but they're not ultimately your buyer. They're the user. So we're doing PR for the buyer and for the user, and it's two different kinds of efforts. As far as the question that you asked about how do we reach out, there are certain relationships that I've had through industry, through networking events, or just through conferences and things like that that I've cultivated and kept, and really I can pick up the equivalent of pick up the phone. I can shoot off a quick email and ask some of the reporters that I have in my network, kind of toss a really interesting sound, like you've got a hook. You've got to create a really good hook. So it's not just like, hey, I've got an article that I want you to write about. But as Melody was saying, there's an article that serves this purpose. Here's the intent. Here's the audience. Here's how I'd like to pitch it. 30% of this pitch is already done. 50% of it could be done for you if you agree to it, and then let's go from there. So I leverage a lot of those relationships, and in today's world of LinkedIn and social networks, you always have access in one way or another to certain networks. If you're talking trade journals or local publications, it's even easier to do that. And if you have relationships at large organizations, then that's great too. But I've also leveraged for certain parts of clients' budgets, reaching out to PR agencies who do have that Rolodex in place. So if I didn't have access to a certain network, I've reached out to companies like Melodies or companies like, AJ's, for example, and asked them as if I could leverage that relationship there, and been able to kind of maximize the spend for customers. So.
Well, let's open it up to Melody and AJ. So what are your tips to startups on how they can identify who they should be contacting and how they should actually get through to them, and then what they should say in terms of crafting their offer?
I can jump in there. I mean,
Please.
At the end of the day, you have to have a great story, whether you know the reporter or not. And I think that's something always to keep in mind when you're looking for, if you get to a point where you're looking for a PR firm and you want to hire someone and they tell you they have great contacts, that's great, but your contacts only go so far because they still have journalistic integrity. So you have to have a great story to pitch them for that symbiotic relationship to work. And it truly is a symbiotic relationship. I think in PR, so much of my work is building these relationships over time, working with journalists as they move from outlet to outlet. Initially I might pitch them over email. I rarely will call a reporter unless I have a personal relationship with them, because the reality is they're not going to pick up their phone if they don't recognize my phone number, because they're writing all day long. They don't have time to take random calls and pitch solicitations. The other thing is you can't underestimate the power of face-to-face interaction with people. So I might, if I'm trying to get to know a reporter, I've read a few things that they've written, and I think a couple of my clients might make sense for upcoming stories. I might just shoot them an email and say, hey, I reference their stories. Reporters love to know that you're actually reading what they're writing and you understand what they care about. And of course, we can't read everything all the time, but it is our job as PR people to really stay on top of what topics are important to reporters, and particularly people that we're specifically pitching. We should know that if we're pitching a reporter who covers food waste, we're not going to pitch them a story on something that's completely irrelevant. So I will often just send out an email and say, hey, I've noticed you've written these great stories. I'm working with a couple clients who might be of interest to you. Would love to, take you out for a coffee and just pick your brain. And you'd be surprised how many times that works if you do it in the right way. I'll give you another example. So next week we have a client in town from Paris, and they are founders of a sustainable shoe brand that has a lot of traction in France, but people in the US really don't know about them. So we're helping them get that traction here. So we're hosting a little bit of a showroom at our office. We have a bunch of the shoes on display. We're going to have lots of French treats, and we're inviting reporters to come throughout the day, meet the founders, check out the collection. Totally casual, no expectation. We're hoping that from this, we create some really great relationships with fashion reporters, because that's not our strong suit. So we want to start to build those relationships, but we're not telling them, come and then you have to write a story. We're saying, come and meet us, come check out the line, and hopefully that will inspire them to write something, or if they're writing a story that's relevant in the future, they'll think of us and come back and say, hey, I'm writing about sustainable fashion brands. Would love to get a comment from your client who I met at that showroom event.
Cool. AJ, anything to add?
Yeah, I think to Melody's point of like going in and understanding and not just sending a cold outreach is actually very, very valid. Knowing a little bit about what's being written about in the industry, what they're writing about. Maybe they just wrote about this topic last month, and so you're going to look a little silly. I will say one service that has nothing to do with TrendKite, but Help a Reporter Out, or HERO, which goes the opposite way. So when a reporter is looking for something specific, it actually goes the other way in terms of the market, and that might be interesting from a startup perspective to see if there's any reporters out there that are looking to write about what you want to pitch.
And just to add to that, that's a free thrice daily email. So it costs nothing, and you get it 3 times a day. You can ignore it or you can read it thoroughly, and it kind of gives you some idea of what people are writing about.
Just to be clear, that's actually a plug for a competitive service, the TrendKite, but I'm totally okay with it because it's honestly, it's a good service that is helpful.
Great. So quick recap, know what you want to say, what the hook is, understand whether you're talking to the right reporter by reading his or her prior work, making sure you're not pitching an article they've just done. If you subscribe to HERO, you know exactly what they want to write about. So that also helps. And then just don't ever call them unless you're already on first name terms with them. Email can work. If you can find a way to get them face-to-face, that's even better. Lightning quick question. What about DMing on Twitter? I've heard conflicting stories about that.
I'm not a big Twitter user, so I don't connect with people on Twitter virtually ever. I will say occasionally, if I really am struggling to find a reporter's contact information and I can't get it through someone in my network, I might send them a message on LinkedIn, but very rarely will I reach out on social. To me, I don't know why, but it feels like it crosses a personal line that I just don't want to get into.
Okay.
I feel the same way as Melody. LinkedIn would be my go-to on that, but it's more of a preference on how active I am on Twitter, kind of the same deal. It certainly works for a lot of organizations, and there's been plenty of success stories, but it just hasn't been my personal choice.
You're nodding. 3 for 3.
3 for 3. Same as the other 2 panelists.
Cool. Very cool. Great. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I want to get a couple more questions and then maybe take a few from the audience. So let me just jump right into it. So what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about PR from, when you talk to startups?
That I'll jump in. That it's a silver bullet. I think that there's a lot of people out there that just will say, okay, we'll have this story, and then they'll just come and it'll be awesome. So it talks to a lot of the things we've discussed. Both Nur-e and Melody have already said it, but it's really basically when you first have that story, you need to make sure that you're continuing to build that brand, and you're continuing with the key messages that you've started with that story, and that goes all the way through. For a startup, it's really important because you're not going to have many bullets in the chamber, so to speak, to actually be able to do that. So I think it's really misunderstood that PR is this thing that's like going to cure everything, because you're going to have millions of people watching and just immediately flock to your website.
Cool.
I totally
Melody, why don't you jump in? Also, you can include in this answer, like, top 2 or 3 mistakes startups make over and over and over again.
Perfect. I totally agree. PR is not a replacement for your business model. And if you don't have quality service or product, it won't matter how many great stories you get. And in fact, it could be a deterrent to getting really positive, good PR if people are having bad experiences with your platform or whatever you've launched. So just being really cognizant of that and finding the right moment to make that first, to engage press, because you really do have one shot when it comes to launching. So just always being cognizant of that. And I would say in terms of mistakes, I mean, I've seen really seasoned entrepreneurs do this time and time again, which is, they have a certain level of ego. They've sold 7 companies before. And so they feel like it's okay that their product is not perfect. They're just going to go out, and it can come back to bite them. I mean, we worked with an iPhone app developer a few years ago who we actually advised him against starting his PR. He wanted to do it. And we said, there's no users on your platform. And this was a platform that was based on people being around you. So if you go on and it's empty, the features are just null and void. And he said, listen, I've done this before. Listen to me. I just want to do it this way. And so ultimately we lost that battle, and it resulted in really negative coverage, and the company really never got off the ground. So I know it can seem like you've been working on something for so long, it's your baby and you're ready to talk about it, but remember that you have really one shot to do this, and the biggest mistake people can make is going out too soon.
Got it. So good PR, bad product means everyone knows you suck. Awesome.
Right.
You're nodding, so I'm going to say you're in agreement. I'm going to give you a different question, right? What are 2 or 3 hacks or best practices or things that startups maybe haven't thought of that they can do tomorrow, or they can start getting in order tomorrow, that will help them with their PR?
The funny thing about live webinars is that you ask that question, I can't really buy myself any time. So maybe I'll just take one of those 3 hacks off the top of my head.
If we get 2 or 3 out of the 3 of you, that's fine too.
I guess the one thing that I would say is that, I was nodding so strongly about having a good product. So, work on your product, make sure that you have a service that you want out there. I'm kidding, that's not a hack. So I think what I would say about a PR hack is recognizing and leveraging kind of all of the channels that are out there. So for me, the one thing that I always tell customers is, as far as the delineation between PR and content marketing and social media marketing, the lines are blurring, for better or for worse. And so if you are doing thought leadership interviews, that counts as PR. You can't say something that's out of your talking points or that you haven't covered, that's not sanctioned for you to say, just because it's a thought leadership interview that you're doing with a certain publication, and you haven't identified that as official PR. It's still PR. It's public relations. That's how people are hearing about you and learning about you. So I would say it's not necessarily a hack, but a tip I would recommend strongly. And I always go back to the story. So it's making sure that you have airtight guidelines, you know exactly what you want to say and to whom you want to say it. How is the audience that you're speaking to going to internalize the message that you're proposing out there, and be prepared to say it in the way that they're ready to hear it. So if you've got, all 3 of us said that, we weren't necessarily ourselves Twitter users, but social media is huge. So if you've got a product that is going to be, if your user base largely uses social media, then you need to have a really strong social media component to your PR. That's not necessarily, I don't think any of these things are hacks, but I think that would be my recommendation that I'd make to every client that I have. And I'll let AJ or Melody jump in and maybe come to me.
You've given them enough time to come up.
You're welcome, guys.
It is a tough question, but I saw something last week that I thought was really, really interesting that worked well for a startup here in Austin. We were at the PR News and Measurement Conference. That's a main conference for us, not huge, about 200 people, but there were actually organizations that were looking to understand how to measure their news, but also publications on the editorial side of things. And all the speakers were great, but they were from big brands, Aflac, Southwest. There was a startup that actually got up and spoke, and he was talking about they had to do with student loans. So they're in the student loan industry, and how much press coverage is being written about student loans, and they're in 0.5% coverage, and they're working on fixing that and their goals, and yada, yada, yada. Well, actually, after the conference, I just kind of noticed, and I talked to him. He had 4 reporters actually come up to him and talk to him after that and wanted to write pieces about it. So I thought that was a really interesting way to go about it as a startup. You're going to a platform where people are listening. They're at a conference. And it's something that you would want to measure because it's obviously costly with the travel, but it could be a really easy way to just get in front of the right people, is figure out where they're going to be and go there.
So stalk them, but subtly.
Yeah. Everyone's all about that today. So whether it's digitally or in person, it's the same thing, right?
You've had the longest, so do you have one, or do you want a new question?
No, I can jump in. I totally agree that speaking opportunities are great, and you can find many of them in your own backyard if you do enough research. So definitely think that's a good way to make some inroads and network with reporters. in addition to that, I think one of the sort of underestimated tools that you can use, and it's a free tool, you do have to sort of develop your voice and be willing to do a little writing to use it, is Medium. It's user generated, but we have a lot of our clients who have profiles on there. And it's a really great way to start sort of creating a channel of your voice. You can always send those links to reporters, or if you want to speak at a conference, that adds a little credibility. It's a good place to be able to sort of openly talk about yourself as an entrepreneur, what you did to build your company, in a way that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do if you had an op-ed in, say, a trade magazine where they would say, that's great, don't talk about your company, just talk about these like 30,000-foot view, your take. So I think that's a good thing to start with, particularly if you don't have a PR budget, but you want to start sort of sharing your ideas in the world.
Cool. I have a couple really quick lightning questions I want to ask, and then I want to open the floor to the teams. And then, I told you guys it was going to be an hour, so if any of you need to leave in an hour, we can call it then. Does that sound good?
Andrew, could I add something really quickly on the last one?
Please.
Since there is something that just came to mind. So I would also recommend, so as we're talking about things like LinkedIn and social media and also web presence, making sure that you have a company equivalent of all of those things. So if your company's creating a LinkedIn page for your company, creating a Facebook page for your company, and for startups, if it's just a couple of people, it's easy to kind of use your personal social media platforms to reach out. I think it adds another level of credibility. And also if reporters are looking for you or looking to learn anything more about your company, it also benefits you to have those things in place, because it's just another venue for you through which to tell your story.
Totally. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Very quick questions. When you speak to the media, can you say anything off the record, or is that just asking for trouble?
I tell my clients everything is always on the record. Unless I have a really personal relationship with the reporter, it's just better that way, because it's hard for people to judge that. And if I'm not in the room, I just tell them whatever you say is fodder for stories.
Okay, I see everyone nodding. So next lightning question. We talked a little bit about a press embargo. You told me that you told everyone what it's about. Do the members of the press actually honor them, or do they end up scooping each other?
We actually screwed that up in our first press release, and we had a Pando Daily exclusive and thought that we could parlay that into an Anthony Ha TechCrunch exclusive, and it blew up in our face. So actually is a pretty big deal. So it's something you do actually want to take seriously.
And I think making the distinction between exclusive and embargo. So an exclusive is you're giving one outlet a story, and that's it. An embargo is you're setting a date and you're giving a handful of reporters who are relevant. They know it's embargoed, so they know that there's potentially other people covering it, and that they all go live on that date.
Yeah, and so that's exactly right. So basically what we had happen was we worked with an agency that thought it would be okay to give, and we were ignorant to the situation, two organizations exclusives with different embargoes, and that's actually what happened, and it blew up for us.
Okay.
I saw the same thing happen and wouldn't recommend it at all. Yeah.
So you mentioned something very interesting a moment ago, the press release. Do they matter, or do people just ignore them, or do they matter only if you use them a certain way?
I feel like press releases are a thing of yesterday, but I think that they're a great place to get all of your messaging in one place. I would not use them to pitch. I would always use them as an addendum to whatever my tailored email pitch is. And I think it's a great place to go for more information, a good way to hone messaging, but the reality is most people aren't reading them.
And that's true. The only exception to that is we found whenever you're fundraising, a VC is going to do research, that will be something that they'll actually look at. But as an event, something that's read about, we have a press release filter in our platform because we don't think extremely highly of them in terms of actual credible news stories that are driving traffic.
I think the only purpose that it serves is really to just it's an artifact. I mean, it's kind of a checking something off of a checklist almost kind of thing. So you have it on your website, you have, it gives you a chance to hone all of your messaging, but I don't think it's really the spearhead.
So what would you put in it other than here is my pro forma press release, so it's now on my website? If it's useful for something, for background, or they'll check on it, what elements should it have?
I mean, it's the who, what, where, when, why, right? It's very basic. If you're launching, it probably makes sense to have one because it's the first time you're talking about what your company does and who you are. And I think it's great for SEO purposes, but they should be short and they should be really to the point and, yeah.
And fact-driven, I would say. So
Yes.
make sure they're not over the top and they're ridiculous.
Hyperbolic, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And once you sort of put it out on the wire, I mean, there's very little control over which trade publication or which international. I mean, some small publication will pick it up. So you want to make sure that everything that's on there, you're comfortable. You obviously don't want to publish anything that you're not comfortable with, but it's not going to generate a huge reaction for you, but it will be out there.
And since you can control it, obviously, this is pretty obvious, but add backlinks to it so you can see yourself what it's actually doing for you.
Okay, great. We have a question from the audience. I believe it was Rich had a question for Nur-e to talk a little bit more about what the channel partnerships look like. Sorry, as I went to go check the question, I actually ended up closing that window. But please describe what a channel partnership looks like and how it's structured to leverage something like Forbes.
Okay, that's a great question. So larger companies define channel partnerships in a very specific manner. For startups and for a lot of my clients, what I encourage them to do is if you can't, I'm working with a client, for example, right now, who's in the international student credit card space. And they themselves are not large enough to really kind of get access to even the 3 largest international student populations. And so what I'm helping them to do is to build relationships with the largest the companies that tend to have the largest presence for these 3 international student populations. So the 3 international student populations, for example, are Indian, Chinese, and Korean. And so we're going out there and leveraging, Weibo, WeChat, QQ, all of these other social media platforms that are relevant to these international student populations, and doing a scrub to see what kinds of content that they have there and who's what kind of publications are posting onto these kinds of sites and who's advertising, and then going out to those companies and those organizations that have that presence and engaging with them to create a this type of two-way partnership and relationship where we say, if we partner with us and we can put our message onto you through your platform, and if you advertise or speak about us on our behalf, we'd be happy to give you access to the populations that we are catering to, and then it becomes beneficial for both parties. So we're building relationships of that nature where they're able to gain access to this audience that this client has, but then the client also gains from essentially in some ways free advertising or with very little input, being able to leverage a network that they otherwise would have had to pay a lot more money to tap into.
Awesome. So Rich, I see we brought you forward here. Did that answer your question? Do you need a follow-up or clarification?
Yeah, it's great. I'm smiling because that's just such a smart way of doing this. And I'm thinking maybe the way we've all been trained, especially somebody who is 50 years old, not all the cohorts have somebody who's as old as I am in the startup, but we've got to rethink the way we've always been told how to use public relations, how to gain publicity, how to leverage the PR channels. This is a new way of playing the game. It's more gaming the system. But I think what Nur-e is saying is if you could find something that's beneficial for both the partners in the channel, then you can come to a place where it works. We're part of the health cohort, Nur-e, so I think when we talk about things like how do we get our very disruptive application into the mainstream media for health, a lot of it tends to be what's your credibility? They want to know what brands you're associated with if you don't have a great brand to talk about. We're just a startup. So I've got to think about what you're saying so it applies to me, but very smart. I appreciate the input. It's great.
And since you're saying you're part of the health cohort, I would love to connect offline if you have any questions or follow-up. I just worked with a startup that had a very interesting trajectory. We launched the company, but it didn't go past Series B. And it was also in the health tech space. And so I'm pretty intimately familiar with a lot of the challenges that are in the health tech space. And with health tech, you have to really get creative with content marketing versus PR. It's all ultimately reaching out to stakeholders, but how do you kind of use what you have within the confines of the rules of the game. So I'd be happy to help and connect with you offline if you'd like.
Excellent. I see that Sam had his hand up, but I don't know where Sam went. Sam, are you still online? Nope, I think we lost. I think we lost Sam.
We lost for Andrew. Keep going.
Okay, so Sam had a question, but Sam lost his place. So end of story. Okay, let's end with this question, right? So most of the companies here are startups. Some are pre-seed, some are post-seed. They all need PR help. When is the right time for them to bring in a PR firm? Or conversely, how much can they or should they do on their own, as best they can?
I can start with that one. I mean, we typically like to come in 2 to 3 months before a company is ready to really make that push for launch, because then we can help influence, what the strategy should be from a communications perspective. It also gives us time to help draft those initial materials, whether it's a press release, talking points, whatever it is. Also maybe help them look at their copy on their website, put together a digital press kit, all of that, which takes time and approval. So I think, you don't need to bring someone in a year before, but I would give it at least a solid few months, because you probably figure you're going to need 2 weeks leading up to your launch to just do straight pitching to get some of those stories lined up.
A lot of the companies have launched, though they're in beta, right? So, what do you define as a launch here? Because, we push all our companies to be out there as early as possible, engaging with the customer.
So go ahead.
Sorry, Melody, go ahead.
I was going to say, the way I define launch is in the media, right? You may be a company that has beta users and you've been out for 6 months and people are, you're sort of testing the product or whatever, maybe even be available. But for me, launch is the first time you are going to tell your story to the public and to the press.
Got it.
So I was just going to follow up and say, I completely agree with what Melody's saying. And if for the companies out there that are, looking to talk to media or think that it's, starting to get to be about the right time where they've got the right story to tell, this is not where you want to botch it. If you can pull money from a beer budget or wherever, I'm not saying that PR is cheap, but if you can kind of pull to support PR, you definitely want people who are specialists, who are experts in PR, who've done it before, to come in and help you write your press release, to kind of help coach you before you do your first interview. I can't tell you the number of clients that I've seen go into an interview, say something completely inappropriate, and then post facto say, oh, that was off the record. That's not how the game works. And you definitely don't want to be one of the people who's done that, and because it will get quoted or it will end up being part of your public image that's out there, and your personal image when you're a startup is tied pretty closely with your company's image. So this is kind of image management, PR, content marketing strategy, all of it. You really just want someone, everyone thinks that they can do it because it's comms, it's easy. They read newspapers or consumers of information, so they feel like they can do it. You really want to pull in, even if it's just on a consultant basis or just for, a one-time, we want to write a press release, can't afford to have you guys on retainer, but can you come in and help us do this? It's probably a smart idea to sort of refocus some of your budget to that.
Cool. AJ, we started with you. Let's end with you. You were a startup. You are still a startup, but you were a scrappy, unfunded startup not too long ago. Where did the oh, damn it, we got to bring in a PR firm come in?
Well, I mean, it was an interesting question really for us because we're a PR software. So for us, it was like, okay, we're going to do this. What I think really transpired, because we did do exactly what you said, where we got our product out the marketplace within 3 months of becoming from a napkin idea during our Dreamit cycle, actually. And Dreamit helped with us because they had the resources to do it as our first release. But right after, when we raised our first round of funding, I think a part of that became, okay, let's actually test PR as a channel for ourselves and see how it goes. So we actually relied on the portfolio companies, and luckily they're all in Austin, to figure out who was going to be best to work with. And we found one that we were happy with. It was obviously a smaller budget at that time in all startups, and there are a lot of people out there that are work on a more of a consulting basis. And then as we grew, we ourselves started to work with a lot of agencies, PR agencies here in Austin. and kind of got to know them, and then built a relationship with one of them, and they ended up being our agency of record. So it really was just kind of a stepping stone to it. I would absolutely recommend, especially if you get seed funding, even if it's a smaller amount, to have at least those conversations with agencies or consultants. Some of them are going to be, the retainers are going to be way out of your ballpark, but that's okay. At least you'll start to understand the industry and how PR works, so that when the time comes that you can take on someone.
Fantastic. Cool. So we are 5 minutes over. I apologize, but it was interesting and I wanted to hear that. I'll give you all, we'll go once around. And is there anything you'd like to add that you haven't already said? And by the way, it's okay to say, no, we covered it all. AJ, you're on camera.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and just kick it off really quickly. I will say that we've seen marketing technology change vastly over the last 15 years. PR has been probably more over the last 5 years, and you're going to see that transformation in 15 years' time. I guarantee that public relations will have that kind of same thought in an organization as marketing, as that this is something that we really need to take seriously. We need to measure, and we need to have the right people saying the right things, because if not, it can make or break how our organization goes. So it's vastly important, and as a startup, something that you should absolutely be thinking about.
Excellent. Nur-e, you were about to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to offer that I think it's really important to vet a PR agency and get recommendations for PR agencies if you can from other people, either in the cohort or other, if you have a network or mentors or anyone like that. I've seen on more occasions than I would have liked to have seen, where an agency comes in and makes really big promises, and it's easy to do that, and it's easy to promise that they'll deliver on that. But if it sounds too good to be true, maybe it is. And I've seen a lot of clients lose a lot of money because it takes a couple of months to figure out that it's not exactly a relationship that's working out. So I would say that the most successful relationships I've seen, not every PR agency and every client are a good fit. You want to find the one that's the right fit for you and for your type of company. And so you kind of want to, talk to some people if you can, and get some recommendations on who might be a good fit for you.
Excellent. Melody, you get the final word.
Sure. I'll just add on to that, because I think what I'm about to say is really tangential to that, which is not just vetting the right PR firms, but remembering that just because you've heard of a PR firm a million times and they're a big player and they're worldwide doesn't mean that they're going to give you the attention that you need and deserve. Oftentimes when you're working with a global PR firm and you're a small startup and you're a small part of their budget, you're going to get put with the junior level person. You might see that senior person on day one and never talk to them again. And so just remember that you'll be a very small portion of their priority, and sometimes working with smaller, lesser known firms who are more aligned with the work that you're doing is a better long-term relationship.
Okay, great. So times are changing. Choose your firm wisely, and it's not always the one you first heard of. Cool. That's a great way to end. The right way to end is, I want to thank all our panelists for their time. Really appreciate it. Very interesting webinar. AJ, I don't know when I'm going to be out in Austin next, probably South by. Hopefully this time you won't skip town.
I'll be there.
Melody, you got no excuses. You're local. We should see each other face to face. Just like you say, we should establish relationships with the members of the press. And Nur-e will be out west towards the end of June with the companies on the Investor Roadshow, if possible. Maybe we'll get a chance to have a beer together or coffee. Or you name it. Great. And with that, thank you all, and have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Thank you.
You.